In this episode, we explore communicating from our deepest knowing. Listen out for when I mention communicating from a state of connection between my body, my mind, and my spirit. And that is when I know that I am communicating from my deepest knowing.
As part of the energy pattern that we unearthed that the power of humanity is about communication. And, you know, we have now focused on words, probably more on writing. And sometimes the writings that we learn about are from a different time and place. And as part of this energy pattern, we have a responsibility to communicate in the here and now in time and space. Whereas, you know, just because something was done a certain way and we've got it written down doesn't mean it applies now. And this is, I suppose, how humanity evolves, because we can communicate in lots of different ways. And we communicate through art. You know, we communicate with words, verbal. We communicate through music. We communicate
movement,
through dance.
If I
Stories.
If I sit here and go,
yeah, you're communicating.
Okay, Bryn. So many light bulbs are happening for me at the moment.
Okay.
Just when you're talking about how, you know, humanity's power is communication and how we've evolved over time. So in my mind, and what I'm seeing play out is, you know, indigenous cultures used all of the art forms, art, song, language, dance, story, ceremony, things like that to communicate, right? And you talk about communicating the here and the now in time and space. Indigenous cultures did that. They still do that, right?
Yes.
However, as we've evolved as humanity, we have had more focus on words. And then now we have it all in writing. Right? And like you say, the writing, some of our scriptures in writing that we hold truth today were from a time that is not now. And so, just whilst we've put focus and importance and truth in written scripture, and knowledge, and we've coined it with knowledge, which is very different to wisdom. We'll get to that later. That process has actually taken us away from the present. And it gets entangled in this timeline that becomes one dimension, or, you know, word, sound. We know now through going back and researching it through science that we communicate more through body language. And silence than we do words. So we know all of that. So I'm just painting a picture of what is playing out for me, that within a timeline, we thought we have it and had it, but in effect, we've actually gone further away and had it entangled.
And it's really interesting about even our process as Wisdom in Your Life for doing these talks or conversations with the three of us. Because we didn't write a script, we didn't put words in. You know, this is Storm's process, right? And before each one of these, we've all drawn pictures, right? And the reason we've drawn pictures is actually to get to our deepest knowing, because we know collectively, collaboratively, that when we do that, we can speak from a place of knowing in the here and now.
In the here and now, in the moment, within the experience of life, which is what we talked about. Developing those capabilities in that moment.
And we have this responsibility to communicate that when we know it, not in 10 years' time. Not in 100 years' time, because then things have changed. So the words that we use today, and even like the meaning of words, has changed, right? And as a joke, like, you know, we say no and sometimes it means yes, and Australians are famous for nah, right? And 100 years ago, it meant something different. But the body language of, I don't want to talk to you and I do this to Bryn, he knows straight away that I don't actually want to talk to him. Or you don't look up, or, right? And it doesn't matter what the words are, the body language. And yeah, it's so fascinating sitting here, like really reflecting on the power of communication. And, you know, and the non-verbal communication.
Yeah. And the power in that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Particularly from that place of knowing.
Yes.
I mean, at the end of the last conversation that we had, I talked about how my head was full of junk information, right? And so I could talk about stuff.
Yeah.
I could talk about stuff ad nauseam and this, that, and the other. But it was all from a place of like the information that I had stored, thinking. None of it had been tried and tested.
No, see, that's really different from my experience, because as you know, like when I went to university, I read thousands and thousands of books and abstracts, you know, the abstract of every psych journal in the library in the areas I was interested in. And at the time, and I've only probably just realised as I'm talking with you now, is because I already had realm theory as my framework for life.
Yes.
And so I was finding bits to connect into that.
Yes.
So it was anchored into everything.
Yeah.
And I always get so frustrated with people that have like done the same units at university to me, and they can't apply that to anything.
They don't have
the
framework.
depth, and they don't have the depth of knowledge of it.
Yes.
And that's just tweaked for me, so thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. And I guess that framework, as I found out, opens up to you as you connect to your knowing. And your knowing is from that, you know, how is it working out in your experience of life? So, you know, I now clean the decks of, you know, all the knowledge. You know, so when people say to me, oh, have you read this book? Whatever it may be nowadays, and my response is, have you read it? Yeah. What did you learn? How have you applied it? How has it made your life move with more ease and grace? And most people are like, oh, I just read the book, Bryn. Well, unless you can thread that.
Yeah, because that's where wisdom comes from, isn't it? It's knowledge, lived experience in practice. Yeah. And if you don't do that, and it doesn't apply to you, it's not good communication. Yeah. You know?
And so the communication for me has become easier as I've connected to my knowing, because it's my knowing here in time and space in this moment, right? Yeah. Not stuff that I heard ages ago, and it's through my experience of doing life, taking things, testing things, playing with things, seeing how I was in this moment and this happened, and now that threads through to where I am now. Yeah. But then the other bit that you know we want to talk about here is when I don't have knowing about something, then that is the time for me to be quiet.
Yes.
And say nothing. And so nowadays, I feel so much more comfortable just sitting quietly. Because it's not my time to talk.
Yes.
And so, you know, caring is about responsibility. A key part of being a human is our power is communication. So it's that responsible human communication of talk your knowing when it is your knowing, not stuff information you've got clattering around.
Yeah, and talking about the information as you're talking, I just remembered. So when I was 12 years old, my mum read a book that told her that it was better to let your children smoke cigarettes than it was to allow them to play at the beach.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
And she just believed it, and I was allowed to smoke at home, which I thought was really cool. But it actually, and do you see how she didn't connect it to her knowing at all, because she'd already given up cigarettes because they weren't serving her, but she allowed me to smoke because she'd read it in a book.
Yeah. This is so interesting for me. You were talking about when you were at uni and how frustrated you would get because someone who learnt the same thing didn't understand the depth, right? Because they didn't have the framework. And I can't remember, Bryn, how you anchored yours, or it was just floating but not connected, right? So a plethora of information.
Yes.
And I'm reflecting whilst we're having this conversation that information for me does not become knowledge until, for me, it's relational. Right? How does it relate to all the moving parts within its ecosystem?
Yes.
How does that information relate to myself and my life right now? How does it relate to other things out there?
So that's that connect and integrate again, isn't it?
And this whole fabric or the structure. And I'll just share, because what I wrote down before was, we're talking about our responsibility as humanity to communicate our knowing. Part of that is knowing when not to talk. And you made a comment on when I don't know something, I need to be quiet, right? You and I are stark opposite, and I love this about us, because my little note is sometimes when we know, depending on who's in front of us, we don't say anything and we just hold space.
Yes.
And that is a wisdom, and that is a knowledge as well.
Yes.
And that's a power of communication. And that's, for me, where a caring part comes into it, depending on the relationship as well. Because sometimes we know things that the person or the people in front of us may not know, but we don't tell them at that time maybe. So it's, a matter of discerning, but it's based on relation as well, and the collective. So just interesting.
Yeah.
Particularly if you sense somebody who's closed as opposed to open.
Yeah, but then also there's a deeper knowing when they're not ready to hear this.
Yes.
And, often I work in domestic violence, and very rarely are people ready to hear that you're an angry person. And so how do we get them to hear that and having ways of communicating that without making this happen?
Yes.
Because we want less conflict.
You know how I've seen that play out before? Is like elders in community, they'll let someone talk and they'll just say nothing.
Yes.
And the silence will be enough for someone to then contemplate what information they just shared in that space.
Yeah.
And the integration will happen later, or the
I've seen
and for me, that's just holding space and being nurturing in a way.
But I've also seen elders in community give someone a look and someone else will give that person a nudge to stop talking. So, and I don't know, but is it like to protect harm from someone else? And sometimes we have a responsibility to communicate that behaviour is not okay. And I was thinking about it in terms of racism as well this morning or yesterday, about, lots of people don't want to speak up, right? Because they don't want a conflict. But what could we do as a collective to communicate, what, that racist joke is not okay? And I was thinking, and I suppose I've done it numerous times, where I just go very quiet and stop interacting. And because we're a collective, that lack of interaction gives a very strong message. Whereas if I say that is racist, don't say that.
Yeah.
They will fire back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I mean, that lack of interaction or that silence allows the space for reflection, right? Or airing something
Yeah.
where words don't.
Well,
Yeah.
we cruise around with this, I believe we cruise around with this like Hollywood-induced myth that if I go and have a chat with them, the penny will drop and everything will change. Because we see this in Hollywood movies, like so-and-so's in a place and it's like, you know, the wise person comes, they have this quick chat, the penny drops and everything's cool. But my knowing is that the reality is far different to that. By and large, the moment when the times when people open enough for you to drop a few nuggets of gold in is few and far between. You know, we see this as parents with kids, but we see it with adults and stuff like that. And so for me, one of the things I've had to learn and practice is understanding the limitation of words, particularly when it comes to boundaries and unacceptable behaviours, and then learning to communicate in my decisions and my doing. So we had a situation, you know, we've had a situation at a swim club where someone's behaviour is just not acceptable, right? And they're in it, okay? They're in their behaviour and what have you, and they see it as being no wrong, right?
So is it unacceptable just to one person in the swim? You know, is it like that, or is
it's been widely.
Or is it unacceptable? That sort of behaviour would be unacceptable in most collectives.
Most collectives.
Right.
Yeah. So there's, you know, because you can just be like, oh, I don't like that person.
Oh yeah. The swim etiquette and doing this. That. No, some of the things that have occurred are just universally unacceptable.
Okay.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And so groups around that, some people have tried to talk to him and just like this, and then you get these. Then what happens is you get these enclaves of people who spend a lot of their times going, you know, he's just not getting it. You know, any normal person would, or you would have thought that, right? But the thing is the communication channel that you've chosen doesn't work, right? Because the person is closed, right? And when people are closed, they become a constant. They're no longer a variable. And what I mean by that is, if Roz is open and I'm talking to her, Roz, the way you do that, I'm not, you know, it pisses me off, or it's not, I don't feel safe, or something like that. You'll take away and
leaning on the table.
You'll take it away and consider it, and you may change the way you be and do around me. So you're a variable, and we're interacting with one another, right? But when someone's closed, they're a constant. And, you know, you can try a couple of times, because this is where that any normal person, or you would have thought, comes from, is the assumption that a person is open and a variable to take on feedback, right? And feedback's such an important thing when we talk about communication to regulate us all. But when someone is closed, and it's so easy to become closed and become a constant in our individualized world, that it becomes confusing to people that they continue to execute these behaviours, yet it's having an impact and they don't connect it. And then what I've found is that then, I've seen this in other groups, but the apex with the swim group was then people start talking and moaning about the fact that the chap's not getting it. I'm like, well, yeah, but you're not communicating anything. And so I had to have a serious word with everyone and say, well, there are other forms of communication, such as, like Roz says, quietly, we're just not swimming with you. Yeah. Right? You get in the water to go swimming, right? We're just going to stand on the beach for another 3 minutes while you swim off, right? And the group is not swimming with you. You know, you stop here, we'll swim past. You know, you come and sit down for a cup of tea to blend in with everyone, because you think, oh, there's no, we'll leave. Right? And I think we think that conflict has to be this angry, confrontational thing, but sometimes it can just be quiet, group, collective. We're not accepting that. and you can use the collective. And so, the group has done that. And now that person is getting a much clearer signal than any other thing that was and generally wasn't happening before.
Yeah.
And, in some ways, people actually get rewarded by the conversations and the conflict.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they want that
attention, drama,
or whatever.
charge, whatever it is.
Whatever it is, then they feel important. Everyone's talking about them, everyone's doing that. And really, because in the energy pattern of humanity, we're actually a collective, being excluded from that collective is actually the biggest thing to change anything. And yet I do think people, especially when they're younger, need to be taught right from wrong and the reason why you're doing this. It's impacting this relationship or this person. It's making people feel uncomfortable, right? But then there comes, after it's been explained, this is with children, then actions speak far louder than words. Right?
Yeah, and I'm just hearing what you just said then around if we're teaching children right from wrong and the reasons why and the impacts on other people, we're really painting a picture of the web of life, right? That we're all interconnected. Perhaps for adults, they never got that fabric. They never got that web of life. Therefore, now it's still not connecting. And so that, is an acknowledgement that we're having, we have adults in the world with no concept of interconnected relationships, therefore unaware of the impacts that it has on their groups or communities or whatever it might be. And as we know within Wisdom in Your Life, language only transmutes 10% of a message, right? Or of knowledge. So the talking to someone and communicating verbally, giving them feedback, it to me is a no-brainer because all the moving parts and all the relationships and all of the experiences of that individual and other people, it's not connecting. So it has to be non-verbal. That to me makes sense, and you've just summed it up. That now it's making sense for that person non-verbally.
And I suppose the other thing that what you were saying, we have an assumption that when we communicate something, that other person's going to hear it how I've intended it.
Oh yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. But as we here know, we often communicate just to the feelings or just to the thinking or just to something. And if you haven't got a clear channel to your deepest knowing, right, you're communicating maybe from guilt, then the message isn't going to come through.
Because it's lost in the...
Furthermore to that, I feel like, people communicate from a values-based as well, and we hear that often now, and it's more common. However, if we unpack that, which we don't often as much, what's sitting at the core value of people is this concept or sense of wrong and right, which then can ignite conflict even further, because then you find yourself in a position where you're convincing the other person or the other person's convincing you. So I guess what we're saying here is that communicating from your deepest knowing goes beyond the values,
beyond beliefs as well,
and beliefs and rights and wrongs, and all of those assumptions, and we're actually communicating from a deeper knowing, which is, as we say, connected, one, to ourselves, to the other person and to the surrounding,
but also to humanity
and to humanity, and integrated. For me, it's important when I'm communicating from my knowing that it's integrated from my headspace to my heart and then to my stomach, which is my deeper part. Connecting with the person in front of me, and also connected or relevant to the scenario, the impact, the environment, whatever it might be.
Yeah, and so in those situations, often words don't actually matter because it's all those other variables that matter most.
Yeah.
And, you know, I often, as you know, people will come and see me and go, what do I say to this person to stop them doing this behaviour? And it's like, well, I can't tell you that. And, you know, people will say, well, what did you say to you know,
So-and-so in this
situation? And, you know, taken out of context, it can be really bad.
Yes.
Right? And so I'm going to share a story which is about a man who was deeply depressed, right? And I'd seen him years before.
Yeah.
And as we went through the whole process, dealing with a whole range of things, at the end of his final session, he just looked at me and he said, I think I threw myself a pity party, right? Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, okay. And that was his perception of it. Mm-hmm. I didn't give him that perception. Mm-hmm. So, come 3 years later, I get another referral for him, and I get him on the phone, and I say to him, so are you throwing yourself another pity party? Right? This man's been referred to me for depression. Would I say that to anyone else? No. Because it's the relationship we had.
Yeah.
It was the history we had. It was his words.
Yep.
I won't put my words of that situation on him. And as soon as I said that, he went, oh, I probably am. And he came in and he just needed one session, and yes, it was, and by that I mean it was how he was perceiving something from a perspective that wasn't actually that real.
Yep.
Right? And so, you know, you can't tell people what words to use.
No.
And when I listen to some of the things telling people, oh, say this in this situation, say that, I'm like, it depends on...
You're missing all the moving parts. And it's dynamic, so it's going to be different every time. I had a little insight when you were talking about that, but it's gone now.
Oh.
Bugger.
Yeah.
One thing I'll add is that when we open up space with others to not just talk from our place of knowing, but, you know, we make it sound at times like your knowing is, there you go, right?
Sorry.
And I just want to make the point that often it's in the exploring within the moment that your knowing suddenly goes, whoa, that's that. You know, you'll have witnessed in this conversation and the others, it's like, whoa, it switches on at that point.
Yeah.
And it, you know, but it's having those space and conversations in the moment, exploring something to allow your knowing to emerge, to me, are the highest quality, most nourishing communicating, discussions I have with other people, right?
Yeah.
To me, it's like the most nutritious, nourishing meal that I can have, right? Compared to a lot of conversation, which is like got the nutritional value of a freaking Big Mac or something fast food. And so, you know, recognize that. And I got this with the podcast, right? Once I opened up a space to actually genuinely talk to people, connect and ask questions and let them talk and explore, and then, that's interesting. And a lot of them were one-sided, but still. But I think I wondered, you know, was that me, or was that, what was that drove that? And now, as I look at the energy pattern of humanity and the fact that our power is communication, why it's in the why of the doing, because we need to be able to communicate what's going on in here, that's where it's located.
Yeah.
That when we have those discussions about what's going on in here, what's going on in my experience, your experience. So even if, we get this in groups, even listening to your experience, all of a sudden I go, whoa, I've just unearthed a stack of knowing. And to me, that is just, awesome.
Yeah. So because we are a collective, right?
Yep.
And humanity is a collective, going and what I'd call navel gazing and connecting to your deepest knowing in isolation is not what we're talking about.
No.
Because as soon as we isolate, that's not the energy pattern. Because, fundamentally everything is connected.
Yeah.
And
So it's not even knowing, you're tricking yourself.
No, it's not a knowing.
Yeah.
It's more of a I don't even know what.
Something.
It's a something, but it's not a knowing, because it's when we have a safe place for people to explore. And you're right, these are the richest moments of my life.
That's shaking.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
The richest of
Yeah.
is this exploring, because it takes us deeper and deeper.
Yeah.
And, yes, I know I, did realm theory and I did all my own work before you guys joined me and others and that, but I could not have unearthed the energy pattern of humanity without having the communication, the collective circular collaboration that we have built up over the last several years. And feeling safe enough to go, you know what, I disagree with you,
Yeah.
without it being a conflict.
Oh, yeah. And, given the last topic was about human development, this is a key component of that.
Yeah.
Of creating space. And how often, I used to wrestle as a management consultant, particularly at the start of projects or the start of initiatives, to get enough quality space for people to just converse and see what would emerge. Because
Communication.
To communicate, but also communicate what's going on in here and allow almost like a group collective intelligence to emerge and a solution to emerge, because it would be like, right, we need to get on with the doing, close things down, right, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this, when often it was like, I need to keep the space open. And people were like, I can give you 40 minutes. Like, well, it's not going to happen in 40 minutes, because sometimes this yarning takes a while.
Yeah. And it's like when we've set today to do this, how much time did we spend before we've actually started having these conversations, drawing and I suppose communicating, and also we had to clear out emotional stuff that's happened because
in our everyday.
24 hours.
in the last 24 hours.
Yeah.
And we have great processes to do that, and then we can just come and things
do that.
It's a centering, right? To come together and then have the channels open and the information and knowing flow through from the centering. Often if we're not centered, then the channels are not open and the knowing's not flowing.
Yeah.
Like that.
The knowing's not flowing.
Which is a key thing we actually did jot down. Cleaning out so the knowing can be flowing.
And I suppose it goes back to the last one, where we have to know ourselves well enough that, because sometimes if we've, had something happen in the last 24 hours and we're emotional about it, because, all human beings are emotional, and we're emotional about it, that we feel safe enough to say, is something else going on, Bryn?
Yeah.
And Bryn will go, I'll need to go and do this. And then he, comes back and it is clear again. And
I'm here.
And you're here.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when emotional stuff is happening, or just stuff is happening, even driving here and seeing an accident, or, getting cut off, you can come in with an emotional charge. And that will stop us from connecting to our deep knowing.
Yeah.
And, that's another thing that we often do. We teach people the processes and practices to keep those channels open.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right at the centre of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that it for this one?
I think
So I guess full circle, bringing it back to, the responsibility of humanity, communicating our knowing, is all of those things in knowing our place, being at the center, having that knowing channeling through, and
knowing when we're not connected.
And how to communicate. At the beginning, in my aha moments of indigenous cultures had all of these different modalities, and now we've turned to written and we stick to that, and it's kind of done the opposite. And
well, in actual fact, we value something that has been written in a book, even though earlier on I said my mum read in a book that you should let your children smoke.
Yeah. Right. Yep.
How does that? That's more valuable than your story from your family.
Yeah.
That's been around for 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 years. But then I was also, even those stories change.
I was just going to get to that as well. That another key thing to acknowledge and to perhaps leave on is that communication changes over time, as we've just said. And so being open to that's going. Well, we see it in our children nowadays anyway.
But the communication, and when I heard this, like the stories about the rock art and that people would paint over other people's paintings, and now we set something in time and space back in the 19 whatever that this is valuable because it's this age. And it's like, is it?
Yeah.
Right. And
it's all part of the cycle.
Yes.
Collective circular collaboration of everything that we do.
Yeah.